Case file number 1. Parasite commencing now. The warning in the snow. Snow fell over Blackwood as though the sky wanted to bury this place forever. Grace Miller gripped the steering wheel, red-rimmed eyes fixed on the white ribbon of road ahead. On either side stood black pine trees, silent as a crowd watching someone die. For years had passed since she left Blackwood, carrying one suitcase and a silent vow never to return. But death was always good at breaking vows. Her phone had buzzed for the 3rd time since leaving New York. Still the same number, Blackwood General Hospital. She tapped the screen, switched to speaker. Miss Miller, Mrs. Margaret's condition is deteriorating rapidly. If you want to see her one last time, you need to come now. Grace ended the call. Her fingers trembled, not from the cold. Her grandmother, the only person left in the world she could call family, was dying in some dim hospital room in the town she had left behind. Grace's parents had died when she was 8. No accident, no illness. They simply vanished because a winter road was too slick and the speed too high. Since then, Grandmother Margaret had been everything. Until Grace grew old enough to understand that everything was sometimes an empty word. Blackwood General smelled of antiseptic and despair. Grace walked a long, hollow corridor, her boots leaving muddy snowprints on the yellowed linoleum. She stopped in front of room 14. Margaret lay in the hospital bed, so small the white blanket seemed to want to swallow her. Her skin was wrinkled and yellow as old paper, her breathing shallow and broken like an ancient pump on the verge of failure. But when Grace stepped inside, the old woman's eyes opened, startlingly sharp. "You came." Her voice was like dry leaves. "Grandma." Grace sat beside the bed and took the bony, ice-cold hand. "You need to rest." "No time to rest anymore." Grandmother Margaret summoned her last strength to squeeze Grace's hand. Her nails dug into Grace's skin, leaving thin red lines. "Listen to me. Listen carefully." Grace didn't dare breathe. "Don't drink the water there." The old woman looked straight into her eyes, voice urgent enough to chill the blood. "Don't drink anything Arthur gives you. And don't let him touch your stomach." "What are you saying?" "Arthur is my uncle. I know who he is." Her eyes blinked once, a blink that held decades of silence and fear. "I know what he has done. I couldn't protect my own daughter." "Protect yourself." A long beep. The electrocardiogram drew a straight line. Nurses flooded in. Grace was pushed into the corridor. She stood there, watching through the small window as the door slammed shut, the warmth of the old woman's grip still lingering in her palm. 30 minutes later, Margaret died, and Grace Miller stood alone in Blackwood General's corridor, carrying a warning she did not know what to do with. Outside, snow kept falling. The house at the forest's edge. Arthur Miller met her at the top of the dirt road, standing under the wooden porch with a kerosene lamp in hand, a portrait of family warmth. He was past 50, large and rugged in the way of miners, broad shoulders, calloused hands, a face carved hard as timber. His eyes were pale gray, the color of sunless winter afternoons. "Grace." He spread his arms wide. "You're home." Grace let him embrace her. His body was cold and rigid as stone, yet the hug felt warm in a way hard to describe. His smell, machine oil, cigarettes, and something damp like wet earth, made her think of summer days in childhood, when she had not yet learned what fear was. "I'm so sorry about your grandmother." He released her and looked into her eyes with what seemed like genuine pain. "She was a good woman." "Yes." Grace nodded. Her throat was bone dry. Her grandmother's warning, "Don't let Arthur touch your stomach," echoed in her mind and faded. The old woman had been past 80, suffering through her final agony. The elderly mind sometimes wandered to strange places. Grace did not want to think ill of the only relative she had left. "Come inside." Arthur took her suitcase. "It's getting cold." Arthur's house sat completely isolated, about 7 miles from Blackwood's center along a forest trail. A 2-story timber house built in his grandfather's time. It looked both aged and solid in a way that left one unsure whether to feel reassured or wary. Behind the house stretched a wide garden, buried under snow. Farther back, half hidden behind bare trees, Grace glimpsed the mouth of an old stone well, sealed with a thick wooden cover and bound with iron chains. And farther still, pressed against the foot of the hill, was the entrance to an abandoned mine, boarded shut with crossed planks. "When did that mine close, Uncle?" Grace asked, not knowing why she couldn't stop herself. 20 years ago, Arthur replied curtly, without turning. "Dangerous. Stay away." Martha, Arthur's wife, was standing in the kitchen when they came in. It was the first time Grace had seen her aunt in 4 years, and she almost didn't recognize the woman. Martha Miller had once been a plump woman with a round face and a ready laugh. The woman standing before Grace now was frightfully gaunt, her face pale as paper, her eyes vacant, fixed on some invisible point in the air. She wore a long old dress that fell to her ankles, covering nearly all of her body. But what made Grace stop was the woman's stomach, swollen in an unnatural way, disproportionate to the rest of her skeletal frame, and something about the way it moved was wrong. "Martha has been ill for a while," Arthur explained, his voice even. "Late-stage cancer. We're trying a new therapy." Martha turned to look at Grace. In that instant, her eyes sharpened, like the last flicker of a candle about to go out. Her lips moved, but no sound escaped. "Hello, Aunt Martha." Grace stepped closer. "I? A convulsion." Martha doubled over the kitchen sink, retching black, viscous fluid. Arthur was immediately at her side, his hand patting her back with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 100 times. "It's nothing." He turned to Grace. "Side effects from the medication. Go upstairs and rest. I'll make you a warm cup of tea." Caleb and the crates in the night. The next morning, Grace woke to a gentle knock on the door. "Grace, do you still remember me?" She opened the door. Standing before her was a tall, lean young man in an old flannel shirt and scuffed leather boots. Short brown hair, blue eyes the color of wet cobblestones. The face was more grown up than 4 years ago, but the smile, careful, slightly hesitant, was exactly the same. "Caleb," Grace exhaled. "God, Caleb." They hugged the way people do who were childhood best friends. Tight, clumsy, full of distance and time. "What are you doing here?" Grace asked. "I still live in Blackwood." Caleb shrugged, though his eyes didn't match the casual tone. "I work at Uncle Arthur's sawmill. He told me you were back. I came to visit. You've still not left? I thought you. Not enough money." He smiled, but this time the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Soon. I'll have enough to go soon." Grace nodded, but something in Caleb's eyes made her pause. Something like guilt, like wanting to say something but being unable to. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. The house had its own sounds. The creak of floorboards, the howl of wind through window cracks, the pop and tick of the furnace. But at midnight, she heard something else. A truck. She looked through the window. Headlights from a small truck swept across the backyard, stopping near the mine entrance. The shadow of Arthur, unmistakable in that large frame, and another figure carried large wooden crates down into the earth. The second figure was wearing an old flannel shirt. Grace stepped back from the window, pressing her back to the cold wall. Her heart hammered. "Caleb, Caleb was helping Arthur move things into the mine at midnight. And those crates, long and narrow in a proportion she didn't want to think about, were carried carefully, as if what was inside was still alive. The deadly breakfast. Try this. An old family recipe passed down from your great-grandmother. It's wonderful for sleep and digestion. Arthur set before her a cup of amber liquid, fragrant with herbs and honey. She had drunk it on 2 consecutive mornings. The first time out of politeness, the second because she had slept so deeply she had forgotten even her dreams. Today was the 3rd day. Grace looked into the cup. She remembered her grandmother's words. "Don't drink anything Arthur gives you." "Can I take it upstairs, Uncle? I'd like to read the morning paper." "Of course." Arthur smiled, the smile of a loving uncle. She carried the cup upstairs, poured it down the bathroom sink, and ran the water. But she had already drunk 2 cups before. 3 days after arriving in Blackwood, on an afternoon, Grace was standing before the bathroom mirror when she felt the first pain. Not pain, that was the wrong word. It was the sensation of movement. Something inside her stomach, small as a finger, contracting. Light enough to be mistaken for indigestion, but no, it had rhythm. It had intention. Grace stared at her reflection. Her face was bloodless. She remembered Aunt Martha, the grotesquely swollen belly, the black retching. The note Martha had slipped into her hand when Arthur wasn't looking. "Run! He's feeding them." Her hands trembled as she searched the bathroom medicine cabinet. Most of it was ordinary. Aspirin, bandages, cold tablets. But in the back corner of the cabinet, hidden behind a large medicine box, was a small unlabeled vial. Clear liquid, no odor. On the cap, written in black marker,
"Experimental compound, not for human use.
High doses fatal to humans." Grace stared at the vial, then at her own stomach in the mirror. The cramp came again, stronger this time. She thought of Martha, who had endured this with no choice. She thought of her grandmother, who had tried to warn her but too late. She thought of the chained well in the garden and wondered why it needed so many iron links. Then she stopped thinking and acted. The dose listed was for livestock at 50 kilograms. She weighed 52. She closed her eyes, drank a quarter of the vial, and waited. 15 minutes later, she lay curled on the cold bathroom tiles, eyes streaming, body shaking as the pain tore through her insides.
The movement finally stopped.
Grace bit down hard, refusing to scream even as the pain threatened to tear her lungs apart. She could not let Arthur hear. Martha's death and the golden cocoons. Martha died on the 4th night during the worst blizzard of that winter. Grace heard sounds from the master bedroom, a low, drawn-out moan, then absolute silence. She was about to go downstairs when she heard Arthur's voice, low and even as a prayer. She stopped on the 3rd step, peering through the narrow gap of the half-open door. Martha lay on the bed, her body curled and smaller than Grace had seen 3 days earlier, as if someone had drained all the fluid from inside her, leaving only dry skin and bone. Her face was so peaceful it looked not like a dead woman's, but like a wax figure. Arthur stood beside the bed, holding a surgical scalpel Grace could not understand how he possessed. She stopped breathing. He cut. Not the slash of a cruel man. It was the cut of someone practiced, precise, and without waste. One long incision through the now collapsed stomach of Martha. And from within, Arthur
Remove something one by one.
Gently and carefully as a gardener harvesting ripe fruit. Cocoons. They were a shimmering golden amber, translucent enough to see something coiled inside, still moving. About 20, perhaps more. Arthur arranged them in a cold plastic box lined with dry ice. "Beautiful," he murmured. his voice tender as a father looking at his children. The best batch yet. Grace pressed her hand over her mouth, crept back up the stairs on the tips of her toes, and didn't breathe until she had shut her bedroom door and dropped to the floor. Her body was shaking, not from the cold. She had to leave, right now, tonight, in the blizzard. Betrayal and the well. Grace stuffed her phone, wallet, and car keys into her coat pocket. She opened the bedroom window and looked down about 2 meters. The snow below would break the fall. She was climbing over the windowsill when she heard Caleb's voice behind her. "Grace!" She froze. He stood in the bedroom doorway, his face ashen. In his hand was a flashlight, its yellow beam trained on her face. "Caleb!" She didn't get down from the sill. "Don't!" "Grace, listen to me." His voice was hoarse and shaking, like someone who had just been running. "You can't leave like this. The storm has blocked all the roads. You'll die in the woods. I'll die in here too." Caleb went silent for a moment, long enough for Grace to understand that he knew. He knew everything. "Caleb," her voice dropped. "Those crates in the mine. Do you know what's inside?" He didn't answer. That was his answer. "Come down." His voice hardened. "Uncle Arthur wants to see you downstairs." "No." "Grace, don't do this, Caleb." Her eyes burned. "I know you. I know you're not this person." Something in his eyes wavered. She saw it clearly. But then he stepped forward, hand reaching out, and she had no other choice. She jumped. The snow didn't catch her right. She landed crooked, her ankle bearing the full impact, pain shooting white hot. She staggered upright and ran toward the back garden, away from the house, toward the forest trail. Caleb gave chase. In the dark and the snow, she didn't see the well until the wooden cover gave way beneath her feet. She fell. The well was not deep, about 5 meters. The thin layer of snow on the bottom wasn't enough to cushion her, but it was enough to keep her from breaking bones. She lay still for a few seconds, eyes shut, taking inventory of damage. Ankle, some scrapes, heart still beating. Then she opened her eyes and saw she was not alone. They lay along the walls of the well, leaning against each other like discarded dolls. Women, she counted 11, perhaps more in the darkness. All still breathing, but that was the last thing that remained of life. Eyes closed, skin blue-gray, breath a whisper. Their stomachs, all swollen in the way Grace now recognized, in the way she now understood. Farms. They were farms. "Hello, Grace." Arthur stood looking down from the mouth of the well, flashlight in hand, his face without expression. "The biological farm. I knew you would figure it out." His voice was as calm as a man discussing the weather. "You're smart, like your father. Let me go." Grace tried to stand, her ankle screaming. "I will." "You will do what?" He crouched at the well's edge, looking straight down at her. "Call the police? The storm has blocked the roads. There's no phone signal. I've been jamming it since morning. You are smart, yes, just not fast enough. Why are you doing this?" Grace's voice broke. She looked at the women around her. Who are they? They have families. They are material. His tone didn't change. Science needs material, and the market needs product. Do you know how much the elderly in Manhattan, in Tokyo, in Dubai pay to be 20 years younger? I have given them that. Parasites. More precisely, symbionts. He lifted the cold plastic box. She recognized it from the night before. They extract anti-aging compounds from their host as they mature. The process is entirely natural. I am simply its optimizer. For the first time, something passed across his face. Not grief, but the discomfort of a man reminded of an inconvenient detail. Martha served her purpose. He stood. That was the best thing she could do for the family. And my father? Grace almost whispered. A silence. Arthur looked down at her, and for the first time Grace saw in his eyes what he had kept hidden for 20 years. Not madness. Worse than madness, the cold logic of a man who had decided the world owed him something. Your father, he spoke slowly. Your father received a full medical scholarship to Columbia because your grandmother altered the family's financial records. She decided her weaker child needed to go more than her stronger one. I, who studied harder, who worked harder, was left behind in the mine to feed the family while my little brother went to medical school. He straightened, his shadow stretching long in the flashlight beam. Your father became a doctor. I became a miner. And for 30 years I asked myself, what could that degree, that name of his do that I could not? Turns out, nothing. I created what no doctor in the world has ever created. He looked down at Grace one last time. And now his daughter will help me create the finest batch yet. Caleb's awakening. Caleb stood at the well's edge, looking down, saying nothing. Grace looked up at him. In Arthur's flashlight, his face was dark and unreadable. Caleb, her voice was steadier than she thought possible. Do you remember 9th grade? When your dog got hit by a car and you sat crying on the side of the road. I was the one who sat down next to you. Not because I knew what to say, just because I knew you didn't want to sit alone. Silence. You're not this person. You know you're not. Grace. His voice was raw. They have families, Caleb. These women. She gestured at the figures around her. There are people out there looking for them. Can you look into their eyes and walk away? Arthur started to say something, but Caleb turned to him. Uncle. His voice was different now. Hard. You told me they were voluntary transfers from rehabilitation camps. You said no one would be hurt. And what does that have to do with? You told me Martha was receiving treatment. You told me Grace just needed to stay a few days so you could sign the inheritance papers. Arthur said nothing. Caleb looked down into the well, looked at the women, looked at Grace, and then he jumped down. I'm sorry, he said, reaching out his hand. I'm sorry, Grace. I was too stupid and too willing to believe. Not now. She gripped his hand and let him pull her upright. Right now we have to get out. From the mouth of the well, Arthur looked down at the two of them, and for the first time, Grace saw him hesitate. Only a split second, but enough for Caleb to act. He hurled the flashlight upward, striking Arthur full in the face. The man fell back. Caleb shoved Grace into the corner of the well. Climb onto my back. Now. The mine entrance. They ran. There was nowhere to go but the mine. Arthur was blocking the way back to the house, and the blizzard was howling outside like a wall of fire. Caleb pulled Grace toward the mine entrance, wrenching the planks aside with the strength of a man who had done physical labor all his life. Inside the mine, it was black as ink. The smell of damp earth, rust, and something organic, sweetly nauseating. Grace switched on her phone flashlight and saw the crates. Not 20, not 50. Hundreds of crates stacked along the tunnel walls, labeled with codes and dates, and interspersed among them, small rooms partitioned with wooden walls, each containing a bed and an N4 drip. Good God! Caleb stopped. Don't stop. Grace pulled him forward. Where's the way out? At the far end of the tunnel, there's an emergency exit. I saw it on the blueprints Uncle Arthur showed me when I was fixing the ventilation system. But he'll block it before we get there. Then we have to get there first. They sprinted through narrow passages, the phone's light bobbing with each step. Behind them, she could hear Arthur. Heavy footfalls. his voice calling her name in the tone of a father forgiving a wayward child, calm and certain. "There's the exit." Caleb pointed ahead, a rusted iron door with a bolt on the inside. Grace ran to it, yanked the bolt. The door wouldn't open. "It's locked from outside." She turned back. He blocked it first. Caleb looked around, looked down the passage, looked at Grace. "I have a phone." He pulled out an old handset, a satellite model from his mining days. "I sent a distress signal before I jumped into the well. State police should arrive within 2 hours. You need to stay in the mine until then." "What about you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he pushed her into a small room off the side of the passage. "Caleb, I'll hold Arthur at the main entrance," he said, his voice so calm she wanted to scream. "Long enough for the police to arrive. Lock the door. Don't open it no matter what you hear. Don't do this. I owe those people in the well." His face in the faint phone light was steady. "And I owe you." He shut the door. Grace heard the lock click from outside. She sat in the darkness, counting seconds, listening to Caleb and Arthur confront each other at the end of the tunnel. Caleb's voice, Arthur's voice, then the clash of metal, the sound of a body falling, then silence. Grace pressed her face to the wooden wall and did not cry, because she had no time to cry. Dawn. The headlights of the state police vehicles shone through the door crack like a light she had forgotten could exist. Grace heard shouting, fists on metal, a gunshot inside the mine. One, then another, then voices crying, "Freeze! Police!" She opened the door. They found Arthur at the far end of the tunnel, hands cuffed, face bloodied. They found the women in the well, 13, not 11, and called the ambulances. They found Caleb at the main mine entrance, sitting slumped against the wall with a stab wound in his shoulder and a tired smile on his lips. "I told you it would be fine." Grace sat down beside him and said nothing. There was nothing that needed to be said. Outside, the blizzard had stopped. Blackwood was bathed in the red and blue light of the rescue teams. The whole town watching, neighbors in pajamas and hastily grabbed coats. None of them understanding what had happened, but all sensing that something long broken inside this small town had finally split open. Grace stood beside a police car, watching them lead Arthur out in handcuffs. He walked with his back straight, head high, like a man who did not understand what he had done wrong. Perhaps he truly did not understand. That was the most frightening thing of all. The Chronicle newsroom, New York, 3 months later. The Chronicle's office on a late afternoon smelled of cold coffee and deadlines. Grace sat before her screen, fingers resting on the keyboard, staring at the blank, blinking page. On her desk were 2 photographs. One was of Caleb, taken outside the Blackwood sawmill, grinning in the way of someone who has never learned to smile for cameras. His shoulder bore a fresh scar, still new. He had left Blackwood 3 weeks earlier, moved to Portland, started working as a freelance carpenter. He had finally had enough money to go. The other was of Arthur in the courtroom, sitting upright, staring straight into the camera as if he wanted people to see his face clearly. The investigation revealed his biological farm had been operating for at least 12 years. 18 missing women from Blackwood and surrounding towns. 37 underground pharmaceutical companies across 6 countries. And Arthur Miller, retired miner the brother left behind, had accumulated $32 million. Grace placed her hand over her stomach, where a thin scar about 3 centimeters long remained. Not from a knife, but from a laparoscopy performed when she reached the hospital after that night. The doctor said she was lucky. The doctor said the dose she had taken could have killed her. She knew. She had gambled and not lost. Not everyone was that lucky. She looked back at the screen and began to type. The Parasite of Greed, The Secret Behind Multimillion-Dollar Mansions, by Grace Miller, investigative reporter. They paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for a youth injection. They didn't ask where it came from. Perhaps they didn't want to know. But I was at the bottom of a well with the women whose bodies had been turned into farms. And I need you to look into their eyes, even if only through these lines, and understand that the immortality of the wealthy is paid for by the slow death of the poor. This is their story,